Hyannis was a small town where time seemed to slow down, and every corner breathed the gentle rhythm of familiar routines. But on the eastern edge of town, in an old wooden house covered in wild daisies, that peace had been stolen, and inside it lived a 5-year-old girl named Eva. With her grandparents, Eva used to be the shining light of that house, a little girl with a ringing laugh, smiling eyes, and tiny footsteps that echoed on the wooden floor every morning. She grew up among playful barking, between dog training sessions that stretched from dawn till dusk, because her parents, James and Caroline, were the most renowned dog trainers in the region. The 6 German shepherds they trained, Max, Luna, Rex, and 3 other loyal companions, were part of the family. Eva didn't just know their names. She understood the language in their eyes like it was written into her blood. Then one day, tragedy struck. A horrific collision. No one survived. On a night drenched with heavy rain, Eva lost her father, lost her mother, and lost her own voice. From that day on, the little girl spoke no more. Not a word, not a tear. She never uttered her parents' names. She only stared out the window, toward the forest path that led out of town, still bearing the mark of tire tracks in the wet earth, and remained silent. Her grandparents, Margaret and Walter, were kind, patient people, but age hadn't given them enough strength to reach the part of Eva's memory where her heart had locked itself away. They cooked, they told stories, they sang the lullabies her mother used to sing, but Eva just sat there, motionless, clutching tightly to a frayed little cloth her mother had left behind. Only the 6 dogs never left Eva's side. No one could explain why they stayed with her every second. They curled around her bed each night, followed her out to the porch, sat beside her when she hugged her knees and watched the rain. They didn't bark, didn't intrude, they simply stayed, as if they knew Eva needed that silence more than any comfort words could offer. Max, the alpha dog, always lay by Eva's feet. Luna gently rested her head on Eva's small hand. And Rex, quick and keen, stood guard every time Eva stepped quietly into the yard, like a bodyguard who didn't need to be told what to do. And so summer passed. Then autumn came. In that little house, Eva still didn't speak, but each morning, the 6 dogs lined up outside her door, like a silent ritual never missed. Warm brown eyes waiting, tails gently wagging in the quiet. Perhaps only those who've known deep, true loss can understand. Sometimes, the only thing holding a fragile soul together is presence, wordless, without judgment, asking for nothing, simply someone being there. And Eva had 6 someones like that. Each morning, just before the sun fully rose above the treeline on the horizon of Hyannis, a quiet yet sacred scene unfolded at the wooden house where Eva lived. While Grandpa Walter busied himself preparing breakfast, and Grandma Margaret silently brewed tea with her now trembling hands, down the back hallway, 6 German shepherds were already seated neatly outside Eva's bedroom door. No one had taught them to do this. No one reminded them, but they came every day, as if they understood perfectly. Behind that wooden door was a soul drifting in silence. And sometimes, just the smallest sliver of light was enough to guide Eva back. They didn't scratch, they didn't whine, they just sat, keeping watch with absolute patience, as if time no longer mattered, as long as the little girl behind that door was still trying to breathe. And sometimes, that door would creak open, just a little, just enough for Eva to see those waiting eyes, those gently wagging tails, and so she would quietly sit down in the middle of that silent circle. Say nothing, but place her small hands on Max's head, or gently stroke Luna's back. And in those moments, Eva's heart was no longer completely silent. Each dog had its own way of soothing her sorrow. Max always rested his head against her shoulder like a quiet father figure. Luna liked to nuzzle her nose into the girl's palm, as if to awaken the feelings sleeping inside. And Rex, the swiftest, often sat with his head tilted, as though guarding the outside world on Eva's behalf. She never needed to speak, because those dogs had never required words. Margaret had once wept silently behind the door as she watched that moment, a tiny girl surrounded by 6 loyal beings like guardian spirits. Even if the world had turned its back, Eva still had a universe of her own, where hearts that had never known betrayal quietly waited for her return. Mornings like these made the house feel just a little lighter, no longer frozen by grief. It became something like a quiet temple, where a little girl was being held back from the edge of forgetting, by wordless creatures who somehow understood everything. Walter and Margaret had always tried, not with grand words or some kind of miracle, but with the small things. Repeated every single day. A simple dinner placed beside the empty chair. A soft hug from behind when Eva walked past in silence. A hand gently resting on the other's shoulder after long days spent simply sighing with their heads down. But age is not merciful. And grief, like a biting wind, quietly slipped through every crack in the house, making all their efforts feel fragile. Every night, after Eva had nestled beneath her blanket with Max keeping guard beside her bed, Margaret and Walter would sit in the kitchen, the old kitchen with its dim yellow bulb. On the table were stacks of bills, hospital fees, electricity, dog food, medicine for themselves, each piece of paper like a tiny needle pricking the silence between the two elderly souls. Walter often said nothing. He would just sit there, fingers tapping lightly against his teacup, eyes staring into a nameless void. Margaret still tried to keep her voice gentle, but at times, she had to grip her porcelain cup tightly, as if letting go might shatter her entirely. Then one night, Walter spoke softly, like someone confessing a forbidden truth. "We can't do it anymore. Margaret, those 6 dogs, they need more than we can give." Margaret didn't answer right away. She looked down at the most recent vet bill, then nodded quietly, not because she agreed, but because she knew the truth was knocking at their door. Both of them understood it wouldn't be easy. For Eva, those 6 dogs weren't just memories, they were the last pieces of the world she had left. The next day, as the cold light of winter slipped through the window, Walter called out to Eva from behind the chair. The little girl was sitting by the window, Max resting his chin on her knees, eyes half closed. The other dogs lay around her like a silent wall. Walter sat down, his voice trembling but slow. "Eva, sweetheart, we've tried, but we may have to find another home for your dogs. A place where someone can take better care of them." Eva didn't react. The small hand stroking Max's back stopped, frozen in stillness. Then she stood up. No crying, no yelling, just a soft step past her grandfather, back into her room, and she closed the door, so quietly it felt like Walter's heart was breaking. Piece by piece. That night, Margaret placed a tray of food outside Eva's door, like always. But Eva didn't open it. On the other side of the door, the 6 German shepherds lay stretched out in silence. No whining, no scratching, they just lay there, like a barrier between Eva's pain and the rest of the world. And when Max rested his head gently against the closed door, his eyes quiet and unwavering, it was as if he were saying, "We're not going anywhere, Eva, not until you're ready." The days that followed passed by like a fog. Eva did not leave her room. She curled up under the blanket, her back turned toward the world, as if by remaining silent, by shrinking herself into something small and invisible, she could hold everything from falling apart. Meals were still placed regularly outside her door, but always remained untouched when taken back. The house, already quiet, now felt submerged in a stillness so deep it was almost eerie. But on the other side of that door, the 6 German shepherds remained steadfast. No complaints, no scratching, no barking. They simply sat there, day after day, like silent sentinels guarding the grief of a child. Then one morning, something shifted. Max was the first. He picked up his leash from the wall hook, gently gripped it in his mouth, and tapped it against Eva's door. Not harshly, not impatiently, just a patient knock, a quiet invitation. Rex followed next, then Luna. One by one, each dog brought their leash to Eva's closed door, as if they were inviting her, reminding her, "We can still go outside. There are still roads waiting for your feet." At first, nothing changed, but then, on a morning when the golden light of dawn streamed through the window, Eva opened the door. Max was still there, leash in his mouth, eyes bright and full of hope. She said nothing, but for the first time in many days, her eyes didn't look down. Eva knelt, gently touched Max's head, and slowly clipped the leash onto his collar, a familiar motion, like muscle memory from a life before. Then, one by one, the other dogs stepped forward. Luna, Rex, Zara, Bruno, Miko. Eva's small hands trembled slightly, but they didn't stop. Each leash clicked into place, as if every snap was stitching back together a rhythm of life the little girl had once lost. From the doorway, Margaret and Walter stood silently. They said nothing. They only held each other's hands tightly, like two people who had just witnessed a flower bloom in the heart of a long, bitter winter. That morning, the park still seemed half asleep. Dewdrops sparkled on the grass, untouched by the rising sun. The crisp air gently caressed the leaves, every breath of wind soft as a whisper. Eva stepped out of the house, her small hand gripping 6 leashes, each one like a thread connecting her heart to a piece of memory. The dogs walked beside her in quiet unison, needing no command, no guidance. They had walked beside her like this when her parents were still alive. And now, they walked beside her again, as if to say, the past hasn't disappeared. It's simply resting, sleeping peacefully within them all. Passers-by stopped, some smiled, others quietly placed a hand over their chest, as if something deep inside them had just been touched. A tiny girl, walking 6 proud but gentle German shepherds, like a unit trained not by discipline but by love. Each of Eva's steps was slow, but steady. Her eyes still spoke no words. But something was returning, a light, faint yet undeniable, like the rising sun. Margaret and Walter watched from a distance, seated in silence on a park bench near the entrance. She held his hand. Neither of them said a word. But they knew, that little girl, their beloved granddaughter, had just done something far greater than any words could capture. She had taken her first step back into the world. A light breeze passed by, lifting the hem of Eva's dress and ruffling Max's fur. For the first time in so many days, the little girl looked up at the sky, not to search for answers, but simply to remind herself. She was still here, and so were they, the ones she loved, watching from somewhere beyond. In the steady rhythm of 6 loyal hearts walking beside her, the park remained peaceful, until Max stopped. Eva froze, her small hand still held tightly onto the leash, but her gaze had lifted from the ground, following Max's sharp, unwavering stare. A taut silence spread through the breeze. Max didn't bark, he didn't growl, but his entire body tightened, like a drawn bowstring. The other dogs reacted instantly. Luna lunged slightly forward, ears erect. Rex circled to Eva's left, placing himself between her and the direction Max was watching, forming a silent, living shield. Eva followed Max's gaze, and then she saw it. A child, maybe 4 years old, teetering near the edge of the distant lake. No one nearby seemed to notice. No cries for help, no one running, just the soft ripple of water and long shadows stretched silently over the grass. And then, the child slipped. The splash was quiet, but to Eva, it was an explosion. There was no time to think. No screams, only 6 blurs bursting forward like arrows. The leashes slipped from her hand. Her fingers were suddenly empty. And in that fleeting moment, her whole body felt suspended in space, not from fear, but from faith. Max was the first to hit the water, without hesitation. Luna and Rex dove in on either side, swimming as if they'd been born for this very moment. The other 3 dogs split off, barking fiercely, shattering the deceptive peace like alarms breaking a deep trance. Their barks pierced the stillness, pulling adults from their daydreams and sending people running toward the lake. Max reached the child first, gently clamping onto the back of the soaked shirt, exactly as he'd been trained. Without harm, Luna swam up on the right, steadying the child's limp body with her shoulder. Rex came around from behind, using his chest and legs to nudge and lift the child with each determined push through the water. They moved in perfect harmony, as if this had been rehearsed 100 times. But it hadn't. This was the first time, and the only time it ever needed to be. On the shore, Eva stood motionless, her fists clenched, her eyes unblinking, and in them, not a trace of emptiness remained, only unwavering trust. Max dragged the child onto the bank. A woman screamed as she ran forward, voice hoarse and frantic. "My baby! Oh my God, my baby!" The park seemed frozen, and then it erupted. People gathered, cries, shouts, breathless gasps, mixing with the sound of water dripping off 3 soaked dogs. But no one dared to approach Eva. No one dared to interfere with the dogs. Because what they had just witnessed was something beyond instinct, a moment where species no longer mattered, and only life, love, and the will to protect remained. Eva dropped to her knees and opened her arms as Max, soaked and panting, walked toward her. No words were spoken, just an embrace, between a little girl who had once lost her whole world, and the dog who had been trained by the very parents she had loved. And in Max's eyes was a whole story, a memory, a duty, a love, a silent promise that said, "We're still here, and we will never let you face the world alone." That afternoon, the small town of Hyannis was no longer as peaceful as usual. From phones buzzing in strangers' pockets to screens lighting up across social media, a 1-minute video had spread like a spark igniting a field of dry summer grass, 6 dogs plunging into a lake, moving as one like an elite rescue team, saving a child before the stunned eyes of dozens. And at the center of the frame, a tiny, frail girl standing silently among the large dogs, like the silent captain of a legendary unit. Her name was Eva. Within hours, the clip aired on the evening news. Tickers flashed across screens. A miracle from 6 perfectly trained dogs. A silent girl leads a rescue that changed everything. Thousands of comments poured in. At first, people praised the exceptional training of Eva's parents, then quickly, the deeper story began to emerge. Old photos surfaced, Eva sitting between 2 adults and a litter of puppies, her eyes radiant. Then came the news of the devastating accident that took both her parents. Then the silence. And recently, the looming threat that Eva might be separated from her 6 dogs, because her elderly grandparents could no longer afford their care. Admiration turned into a powerful wave of empathy. A mother from another state wrote, "If my daughter lost both her parents and stayed silent for a whole year, with only her dogs to hold her together, I don't know how I'd keep her heart intact. I'll help Eva." A man shared, "I'm a former K9 trainer. I have a son the same age as Eva. I know those dogs aren't just companions. They're the last thread keeping a fragile soul from falling into the dark." And then, beyond the comments, action. A small group formed online, calling themselves, "Keep Eva's Pack Together." They launched a fundraising campaign. Every hour, the amount grew. First hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. News outlets came knocking. Reporters set up tents outside Eva's home. Margaret, Eva's grandmother, stepped out with Walter, trembling but composed, and said only one thing: "We've never asked anyone for anything. But if you've seen the miracle of the bond between a little girl and her loyal dogs, then please understand, keeping them together is keeping what's left of my granddaughter's heart alive." That quote ran the next morning on the front page, bold beneath a photo of Eva and the 6 dogs sitting silently on the front steps. And then, it wasn't just money. A local vet clinic pledged free lifetime care for all 6 dogs. A pet food company sent over bags of food and vitamins. A small construction business offered to renovate the backyard, to build a private dog park for Eva's pack. A garden of memories. The entire town of Hyannis seemed to awaken, not from any supernatural miracle, but because quiet loyalty had spoken the words that one little girl still couldn't. And Eva? She still hadn't spoken since that fateful morning. But each day, she sat among her 6 dogs, her eyes a little brighter. She drew circles and squiggles in the dirt. And only once, when Margaret handed her the newspaper with the 6 dogs on the front page, Eva gently placed her hand on the photo, then leaned down to hug Max, as if to say, "We've been seen, and they understand. Some things don't need words." But when an entire community hears the voice of loyalty, and of unconditional love, that is the sound that truly touches the heart. That morning, the sky was gray but no longer gloomy. The clouds drifted quietly, signaling neither storm nor sunshine. In the small wooden house at the end of the street, time seemed to still move slowly, but something in the air had changed. Eva woke up earlier than usual. The 6 German shepherds were already arranged in a circle around her bed as always, but this time, they weren't just waiting. They looked at her, not with worry, but with something else, hope. Margaret stood silently in the kitchen, a cup of cold tea in her hand, eyes fixed on her granddaughter's bedroom door. Walter sat behind his newspaper, quiet as usual, but the weight in his eyes wasn't as heavy as it had been. They both felt it. Something was different today. The door creaked open. Eva stepped out, her hair slightly messy, one hand clutching a scrap of paper scribbled with a drawing of 6 dogs and a small girl in the center. No one said anything. But Max was the first to rise. Walking over to gently rest his head on her hand, Eva sat down on the wooden floor. The 6 dogs circled around her, as if awaiting orders from a tiny general. She opened her mouth, softly, like she only meant to exhale, but what came out was a word. Max. The room froze. Max lifted his head, ears perked. Margaret dropped her cup. Walter slowly lowered the newspaper, his hands trembling, unable to believe what he'd just heard. Eva said it again. Max, Luna, Rex. Her voice broke free, like a melody once lost in the forest, now finding its way home. She continued, calling out each dog's name, slowly. Clearly, her voice quiet but certain. Zoe, Thor, Bella. All 6 dogs moved at once. One leapt forward to lick her cheek. Another nudged her shoulder. The rest simply sat close, as if guarding her from the tidal wave of emotion rising inside her. And then Eva laughed, a fragile sound. Still faint, but it was the first laugh since that fateful day. She wrapped her arms tightly around Max, then turned to Margaret, eyes glistening. I don't want to be away from them, Eva said. Just 6 words, but they were enough to make Margaret cry. Walter stood, walked over, and knelt beside his granddaughter, gently stroking her hair. No one will ever take them from you, Eva, he whispered. No one. But the story didn't end with a single word. Eva began speaking more. At first, it was just the names of games she'd played with her parents. Simple dog training commands, then gradually, memories. Not just the images locked inside her head, but real words, sent out into the world. Reporters came, but this time, no one knocked or intruded. They stayed at a distance, capturing quiet moments. A little girl reading aloud from a children's book, sitting among 6 loyal dogs. Neighbors whispered to each other, Eva is back. And they were right. She was no longer the girl with the hollow eyes, walking silently through crowds. She was Eva again, a small soul shining once more, surrounded by the steadfast shadows of 6 4-legged friends. Warriors who didn't need words to prove their love. Because love had done what no medicine, no therapy, no comfort had managed to do. It had awakened the voice of a heart once thought lost. Eva looked up at the sky and smiled. News of little Eva and her 6 loyal dogs spread like a warm wave in the middle of a bitter winter. It wasn't just the story of a child finding her voice again. It was a living testament to the power of unconditional love. A short video clip, capturing the moment Eva called out the names of each dog, was uploaded by a neighbor who happened to be standing outside the gate. Within days, it had been shared across social media platforms, quietly making its way into the hearts of millions. Comments flooded in. One person wrote, I cried when I heard the little girl say, Max. Another shared, that wasn't just a dog's name. That was the first ray of light after a child's storm. Then came the letters, the small gifts sent from all over, toys, dog food, children's storybooks, warm clothes for Eva, new collars for Luna and Rex. The old wooden house of Margaret and Walter, once always so quiet, suddenly buzzed with life. Like a bird's nest flung open to the morning sun. People from the town of Hyannis stopped by in turns. Some helped fix the fence. Others repaired the rotting porch. A local veterinary clinic offered to provide free medical care for the 6 dogs for life. A small bookstore donated an entire set of dog-themed comic books for Eva. And a nearby elementary school announced it was ready to enroll Eva anytime she was ready, with the promise, we'll let Rex sit right beside her desk. Walter never thought he'd one day cry over a single envelope. But when he opened a check sent from a stranger, along with a scribbled note saying, for Eva and her loyal friends, all he could do was place his hand over his heart and sit in silence for a long while. As for Margaret, her morning routine no longer meant cooking for just 3. It was for 6 wagging tails now constantly circling the breakfast table. Cheerful like a pack of joyful children. Yet among all the wonders, there was one moment that left everyone who witnessed it speechless. That day, Eva was sitting in the town park, the same park where she used to walk her 6 dogs. Her long hair was neatly tied back, a storybook in her hand. Around her were Max, Luna, Rex, and the others, lying still, ears perked up, as if they were truly listening. A group of elementary school students came near, shyly watching Eva. A little girl in the group softly asked, are you the girl in the video? You said their names so beautifully. Eva turned, a bit shy, then nodded. Can you say it again? I like the way you said, Rex. Eva hesitated, but then she turned to Rex, placed a hand gently on his head, smiled, and spoke. Rex. The whole group burst into applause. Another child shouted out, they're like superheroes. Are they the rescue dog team? Eva laughed, a clear, pure laugh with no trace of shadows. And in that moment, no one thought about grief or tragedy. There was only a girl, once broken, now rising again within the embrace of a whole community. And under the warm gaze of 6 loyal friends who had never left her side. In a town once known for its quiet like Hyannis, there was now a story being retold again and again, like a familiar song. A story about a little girl named Eva, a pack of dogs that knew how to listen, and a miracle that didn't fall from the sky, but rose from loyalty. And a community that knew how to love. One early autumn afternoon, the sky over Hyannis was covered with a thin veil of clouds. The sun was not harsh, just warm enough to gently dry the last drops of dew on the leaves. Eva sat on the wooden steps of the front porch, her hands softly stroking Max's back, her eyes quietly following the golden leaves gliding through the breeze. Walter sat in his old rocking chair, occasionally glancing over at his granddaughter without saying a word. Margaret stepped out from inside, carrying a cup of hot cocoa and placing it next to Eva. But the little girl didn't drink it right away. Instead, she turned to Max and whispered softly, "Today I want to try." Walter froze. Margaret fell silent. They didn't dare ask, "Try what?" But Max lifted his head, as if he already knew. A few minutes later, the whole family was on their way to the nearby elementary school, the one that had sent multiple invitations but never received a reply. This time, it was Eva who took the initiative. She held Walter's hand, slowly walking through the large gate with the sign that read, "Welcome, new students." Behind her, 6 dogs walked in steady step, like a silent security detail. The principal, a kind woman with silver curls, came out to greet them. She crouched down, didn't ask too many questions, and simply smiled. "Your name is Eva, right? We're so happy you're here." Eva nodded, just a small nod, but it was enough to make every gaze in the schoolyard pause. The children who had once seen the rescue video in the park were now seeing that girl in the flesh. And especially the 6 dogs beside her, not intimidating, only exuding an air of quiet majesty. A little boy from the class ran over, holding a cookie in his hand and reaching it toward Rex. "You're Rex, right? I saw you on TV." Rex stepped forward, gently licked the boy's hand, then turned to look at Eva. And for the first time among a group of new friends, Eva smiled. Not a forced or shy smile, but a full, radiant smile, like the late autumn sun peeking out from behind gray clouds. She walked over to the group of children. At first, she didn't say anything, but when she saw a little girl struggling to tie her shoelaces, Eva knelt down, helped her, and gently said, "You do it like this, it's easier." That voice, seemingly ordinary, was the final door closing on the long months of silence. The teacher standing nearby turned away, choked with emotion. Margaret placed a hand on her chest, whispering, "Thank God." Walter wiped his glasses, even though they weren't fogged. From that day on, Eva was no longer the girl who didn't speak. She became a part of the classroom. She didn't speak much, but every word she said made the other children listen, because everyone knew her voice had traveled a very long road to return. Max, Luna, Rex, and the other dogs took turns coming to school with Eva during special sessions, not as pets, but as companions in her journey of healing. A few months later, at a small school festival, Eva was invited on stage. She stood beneath the warm lights, arms wrapped around Rex's neck, and when the microphone was handed to her, she spoke. "I used to think I'd never feel happy again, but then Max, Luna, Rex, and all of them helped me hear the sound of love." The whole auditorium stood and applauded. A long round of applause, not for a grand speech, but for the quiet courage of a 5-year-old girl and the 6 four-legged souls who never left her side. If you've ever believed in the bond between humans and animals, then Eva's story is the gentlest affirmation of that truth. Because there are wounds that cannot be healed by medicine, but only by the gaze of a dog who knows how to love unconditionally.